While not the leader of the group, it's undeniable that Bumblebee was one of the brightest stars of 2007's Transformers. And while I've enjoyed the screen time he's received in subsequent films, I do believe that Bumblebee has become a stagnant and oversaturated character, and that the studio has shot themselves in the foot with their mishandling of the character of Bumblebee. In the first Transformers film, Bumblebee is our introduction to the Autobots, and despite not being able to speak, his personality and charm shines through. It's also a smart decision to have the first Autobot we meet be unable to speak, as it provides intrigue into who he really is. But ultimately, he is a very similar character arc to E.T. in the Spielberg classic, though in Bumblebee's case he actually is successfully abducted by the government at one point, and rather than going to live with his own kind at the end of the film, through the use of his radio he tells Optimus that, "I wish to stay with the boy." And in Revenge of the Fallen we see that Bumblebee has essentially become a supersized mechanical family dog for Sam. When kitchen appliances start turning into mini Decepticons, Bumblebee destroys Sam's room in an attempt to protect him, and in response he gets reprimanded and told to get in the garage. This humorous sequence, while seemingly inconsequential to the franchise as a whole, is symbolic of who Bumblebee is as a character in every outing we see him in. He's a very loyal and protective Autobot, and has a strong, somewhat juvenile sense of humor. From the biatch sign hanging from his rearview mirror, to the comedic way in which he uses the radio to play the perfect song or the perfect movie clip, he's certainly a funny character meant to provide comic relief at times, but in the first 3 Transformers films, he is also badass, in Dark of the Moon specifically. When Soundwave is about to execute him and he manages to turn the tables and best him, this is arguably one of the best action sequences in the entire franchise, and is proof that while he isn't on Optimus Prime's level, he is a force to be reckoned with. And then came Age of Extinction. Now, Age of Extinction got a lot of things wrong, but it definitely pushed the Bumblebee humor a little too far, to the point where he comes off as a bit of a stumbling idiot. For example, he tried to hold command in Prime's absence, but Drift and the others think he's more of a child than leader and openly dismiss him in front of the entire group. So right off the bat it's being established that the other Autobots don't really take him seriously, so why should the audience? Again, he was funny and had comic relief moments in the first 3 films, but once Ratchet, Ironhide, Prime, and crew pulled up, it was very clear that he was an integral part of the group, not just a child unfit to lead them. The comic relief got turned up too high, as without Sam to play off of, his humor comes off super childish. An example would be when he threw the Transformers equivalent of a temper tantrum, upon realizing that humans had made a Transformer similar to him. And I just thought he was essentially a caricature of himself, with everything turned up a notch and not a ton of the charm of the first 3 films. The Last Night doesn't really have any comedic character moments with Bumblebee, but it does present another issue with the character, and that's the fact that he's essentially invincible, or at the very least unkillable from this point on. Killing off heroes from time to time in ensemble action films is very important because it gives each film stakes. This is why Sentinel Prime killing Ironhide in Dark of the Moon and Hatchet being killed in Age of Extinction hit hard. They didn't come back, and the threat that killed them is now a huge deal moving forward. But when Bumblebee can literally crumble or be torn into pieces and just reassemble, well, we have a problem. For frustrated fans of the franchise and this character, we thankfully got a reboot in 2018 in the film Bumblebee. And while it's certainly better than his Age of Extinction and Last Night outings, no new ground was really broken. I'd venture to say that Bumblebee's connection with Charlie is very similar to his connection with Sam, and this film again gives us a very E.T./Iron Giant-esque story where he just simply has more screen time as the titular character. But with this added screen time comes an uptick in comic relief moments of Bumblebee, such as the scene of him stumbling through the house, which I ultimately found to just be a less funny, Great Value brand version of the scene with all the Transformers in Sam's backyard. Most of the comedy does land, or is at least not offensively bad, but the start of this film gave us a freedom-fighting Bumblebee who could talk, and to have that iteration of the character on screen for approximately 5 minutes before getting reverted to the same old Bumblebee is a little disappointing. I mean, if he was going to lose his memory, could he at least have been able to talk? Even if he is capable of talking, you could still have him use the radio to create funny moments when other people are around, and then just have him talk when he's alone with Charlie. I think rebooting the character gave a golden opportunity to present us with a slightly different version of the character, but instead we just got the same old Bumblebee, which is fine, I guess. But it definitely feels like they only rebooted the franchise because the movie started to suck, and not to tell new stories. And on top of this, Bumblebee's invincibility problem is still present. Throughout the franchise, he's almost died or had a tease of a potential death on 8 separate occasions. The first being when he got abducted in Transformers 1 by the government and went comatose, then he got blown in half by Starscream later in the same film. In Dark of the Moon, we had when the Autobot space shuttle was seemingly blown up, and then when Soundwave was seconds away from executing him later in the film. In The Last Night, he gets ripped apart by Nemesis Prime and even says he's willing to lay down his life for Prime. At the start of Bumblebee, Blitzwing nearly kills him, leaving him with no voice box and no memory. Later in Bumblebee, Dropkick and Shatter temporarily put him out of commission with a shot to the chest. And finally, he gets killed by Scourge in Rise of the Beasts. Or so we thought, because of course he gets revived later in the film. Now I like Bumblebee as much as the next guy, but how many times can we tease his death? Bumblebee is essentially unkillable, because if you kill him after so many fake deaths at this point, I gotta be honest, I'm not gonna give a shit. I'm just gonna expect a revive to come shortly after, so there's no real stakes whenever he's on screen now. Also, now that the studios essentially locked themselves into the character, there's the issue of his character growing stale. I mean, they had the golden opportunity to reboot the character and make him a bit fresh, but instead they kinda just kept things status quo, which means we've now gotten the same exact version of Bumblebee more or less for 7 films. And how many more comedic gags can we get out of him changing the radio dial? All in all, as someone who grew up with the Transformers franchise, Bumblebee was always my second favorite Autobot. But after so many fake deaths and him still not being able to speak, it feels like he's the same exact character he was in 2007, and now has a shield of plot armor protecting him at all times. Maybe there's a way to pivot with the character, but as of now, it unfortunately feels like there's been an oversaturation of this version of Bumblebee. If you enjoyed this analysis on the oversaturation of Bumblebee, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe, and if you feel like I missed anything or you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.